Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be covering all of the basics of React so you know exactly what you need to know in order to get started building projects with React. So let's get started now. Now before we get started, I do want to say in this video, I cannot cover everything there is to know about React. I can cover all of the basics and teach you everything you need to know in order to get started with React, but some of the advanced concepts and some of the mindset shift that you need to take in order to program efficiently in React, I cannot fit into this video, but I do have an entire full course on React that covers all of those advanced topics I can't in this video, and it also covers the mindset shift and the ability to think in components and write efficient React code. So if you're interested in checking that out, make sure to click the link in the description below in order to buy that course. So with that out of the way, let's jump into this tutorial. To get started, I have Visual Studio Code open to a completely blank project, and the first thing we need to do is actually create our React application. And to do that, you need to be inside of a folder that has no capital letters and no spaces in the name. Our folder is called Learn React in X Minutes with dashes in the name instead of spaces, so this is going to work for us just fine. And what we need to do is we need to make sure we have Node installed by just typing node-v, and if you see a version, then that means you have Node installed. If you don't see any version or you see an error, that means you do not have Node installed, and I have a video on how to install Node linked up in the cards and the description below, so you can check that out in order to figure out how to download Node. Now, once we have Node downloaded, what you need to run is npx, which is a lot like npm, but instead of downloading something, it is actually going to run that command for you. And we want to run the command create React app with a period at the end. Essentially, that period says use the folder we're already in to create the application inside of. And when we hit enter, what this is going to do is it's going to start up and create our entire React application. It takes quite a while to download everything, so I'm going to come back to you when it's finished downloading. So now that that's finished downloading everything, you can see that you have a ton of new files and folders on the left-hand side here. And if we scroll up our terminal, you'll see that we have a bunch of commands we can use inside of our application. And the main ones you want to worry about is npm start, which is going to allow us to start up our development environment, and then npm run build. This is going to build our application, minify all of our files, and give us a production version of our application that we can deploy to a server somewhere and actually access on the internet. So npm start for development, npm run build for production. That's essentially all you need to know. Also, we can take a look over at the files that we have over here. Node modules is all of our libraries. In our public folder, we have essentially our HTML file. And what's special about this HTML file is it only has one div, which is our root. There's no style sheets, there's no script tags, nothing is inside of here except for this single div, which is root. And all of our application is going to be put inside of that root div. React is going to generate our HTML and put it inside of this div here. So our HTML is very basic for this application. Really, the main meat and potatoes of the app is in the source folder where we have all of our style sheets, JavaScript, test files, logos. Literally everything in your application that is part of your source files is going to be inside of this source folder. And the main ones I want to look at is our index.js, which is where our application starts. And what this is doing is it's saying React.render, which is saying render the content we pass in here at a certain element. So you can see we're getting the root element, which is that element inside of our HTML, and we're rendering everything inside of our app component inside of that root element. And if we go into our app component, you can see it's rendering just this basic boilerplate code that comes when you create a React application. So let's actually start up our application by running npm start to see what it looks like. And this takes a little bit, but it's going to open up in our browser for us. Now with that loaded up, you can see our application over on the right-hand side. And if we change something, for example, if we change this, instead of saying Learn React, we say Learn React Today and save, it's going to automatically refresh over here for us, which is a really great aspect of React. But for our use case, we want to actually remove all of this boilerplate code. So we're just going to return null here. And if we save this, you should see now nothing is showing up on the side over here. Also, we can remove this extra code for the CSS and logo import, as well as removing this test file, all of these CSS files, the logo file, and also inside of here, we no longer need this service worker code, this CSS file, or this service worker import here. We can also remove this service worker down here. Now, if we save that, you can see we're back to our blank application and we just removed a bunch of the extra stuff that we're not going to be using in this application. And when you're starting with a React app, the first place you're going to start is your app component, because this is the root of your entire application. And for our application, what we're going to be doing is building a really simple to-do list application. I know to-do lists are not the most interesting thing to build, but they're so good at showing all of the things that you need to learn with React in a really concise and short manner. So to get started, the first thing that I want to do is actually write the HTML for our application, and we're going to start inside of our app component and return some HTML inside of here. And a trick you can do is to use parentheses in order to return everything inside of those parentheses, and then we can actually go onto a new line, which allows us to just format our code a little bit nicer. So that's just a quick tip there for you. And the first thing we want to do is we want to return our to-do list, so our list of to-dos. And this is actually going to be a separate component. So we're going to create a component called to-do list, and we're going to return that here as the first element inside of our application. And this isn't normal HTML, as you can see. This is not valid HTML, but it is JSX, which is kind of like React's version of HTML, and it allows you to embed components inside of other components. You can see on our index here, we have our app component being embedded, and inside of here, we have a to-do list component. So we can just create that by saying new file. We can call it to-do-list.js. And I have a plugin installed on Visual Studio Code. If I scroll down here, it's called ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native Snippets. And what this allows me to do is actually just type in RFC and hit enter, and it'll create a function component for us inside of React, and it'll give it the name to-do list, which is the name of our file. Now inside of here, we can import that to-do list component, and we want to import it from /to-do list. So this is getting our component from inside of here, and we can just say hello world, for example, inside of our return. And if we save that and we save our app over here, you see hello world is showing up because in our app, we're rendering to-do list, and in to-do list, we're rendering the text hello world. So now inside of our app, the next thing we want to do is put the input for adding a new to-do. So we can just put an input, and we want to make it a type of text here. And let's just close that off. And if we save, we're immediately going to get an error. And that's because we can't put two HTML elements, or JSX elements in this case, next to each other inside of a return, because this return can only return one thing. Any JavaScript function can only return one thing, and right now we're returning two things, a to-do list and an input. So what we can do is wrap this inside of an empty element. This empty element is called a fragment, and it allows us to return one thing, which is this fragment, which contains two things, which is actually what we want to return. Now we have that to-do list text as well as this input here. Next up, I just want to add a couple buttons. This first button is going to be for adding our to-do, and then we want a second button, which is going to be for clearing our to-do. So we'll just say clear completed to-dos. And then lastly, after this, we're just going to put a div which says how many to-dos we have left to do. We're just going to say 0 left to do. Now if we save that, you see we have our add to do button, our clear completed to-dos, and 0 left to do. And let's just shrink down this name a little bit so that we can get it to fit all in one line, just like that. And that's really all the HTML for our app component. All of the HTML for each one of our to-dos is going to go inside of our to-do list component. But before we can get started into that, first we need to set up the state for our application, because the way React works is it manages state inside of your application, and when that state changes, it re-renders things for us. And we want to store all of our to-dos inside of a state so we can actually render those to-dos, and every time we change a to-do, add a to-do, delete a to-do, it'll actually re-render our entire component tree for us. So in order to use state in a function component, we need to use what's called the useState hook. So we can import this from React like this inside these curly braces, and now we can call the useState function, and we want to pass it our default state. For our to-dos, the default is going to be an empty array. So the first time our app loads, we're going to use an empty array of to-dos because obviously we have no to-dos. And now we need to set this to a variable here. So we can say const, and the interesting thing about useState is it actually returns an array. So we can destructure that array and then set it equal to useState. And the first element is all of our to-dos, and the second element is going to be a function that allows us to update our to-dos. And this is a little bit confusing to look at. Essentially, this is just object destructuring. So if you don't know object destructuring, make sure you check out my video that I have done on object destructuring. It's linked in the cards and description below. But essentially, this first variable here, to-dos, is every single one of the to-dos inside of our to-do state. And the second variable is the function we call to update those to-dos. To show you a little bit of an example of what this would look like with actual data, let's just pass in some default data. We can just say to-do 1, and we can have in here to-do 2 as well. So now we have 2 to-dos by default inside of our application, and we can pass these to our to-do list by just saying to-dos is going to be equal to dos. And this is what's called props. Essentially, all of our components, like app or like to-do list, are going to have props that we can pass to them, and we pass them just like we pass attributes to an HTML element. So we're saying that we have a prop to-dos on our to-do list, and we want to pass the to-dos variable to that prop to-dos. We could have these as different names. This could be called to-do list, for example, and it would be exactly the same. We would just have a to-do list prop on our to-do over here. So instead of here, this would say to-do list. In our case, we're just going to call it to-dos because I think it's easier to work with. So let's make sure we change this also back to to-dos. And now inside of our to-do list, we can actually render out those to-dos. So for now, let's just say to-dos.length, and we need to put this inside of curly brackets here, and that says that this is going to be JavaScript code. Now if we save that, you can see it prints out 2 because we have 2 to-dos in this list. But obviously just printing out the number of to-dos we have is not that useful. We actually want to print out each one of our to-dos. And we can do that really easily inside of a loop. And what we want to do is actually map over our current array and return elements of our actual to-dos. And we're going to do this with a to-do component. So let's create that to-do component. And of course, we want to do that RFC trick in order to generate all the boilerplate code. And inside of here, we're just going to pass in a to-do element just like this. Now we can just save that, go back into our to-do list, and we want to import to-do from /to-do, just like that. Now we actually have our to-do element inside of here, our to-do component. And what we can do is inside of an array, we can actually loop over this. So we can say to-dos.map. And what we want to do is we want to map over all of our to-dos. So for each one of our to-dos, we want to return a to-do element, a to-do component. And we want to pass it our to-do, just like this. And then inside of our to-do, what we can do is we can just say here, we want to print out the to-do just like that. Let's save both of these. And you can see immediately we have to-do 1 being printed and to-do 2 being printed. But there's actually a slight bug here. If we inspect this, we're going to notice inside of our console that we're actually getting an error. It says, warning, each child in a list should have a unique key prop. And what that's saying is that this list of to-dos, React doesn't know how to update these properly. Every time our to-dos array changes, it's going to re-render every single to-do in that list. But we only want it to re-render the ones that change. So what we can do is we can set a key here. In our case, it has to be a unique element. So we can just set it to our to-do name, which is right now unique. Anytime that you have a key, you just need to make sure that it's unique for the array that you're actually using it with. In our case, the name is going to be unique. Now if we save that and go over and inspect, we no longer have that error, as you can see. So that's perfect. And essentially what this key does is it allows React to only re-render or change the components that actually change inside of our array instead of re-rendering all of them every single time. It's really there for efficiency purposes. Now, obviously, we can't just store the name of our to-do. We actually need to store an object of whether or not it's complete. We need to have an ID as well as a name. So back inside of our app, let's actually change this array to be an object. We're going to have an ID of 1. We're going to have a name, which is just going to say to-do 1. And then lastly, we're just going to have a property called complete, which we'll just set here to false for now. So now we have a to-do with an ID, a name, and a complete flag. And then inside of our to-do list, we can just use to-do.id here as our key, since that's going to be unique. And inside of our to-do, we want to just print the name, so we can say to-do.name. Now you can see to-do 1 is showing up perfectly fine, but obviously we don't want to just have the name being printed out. We actually want a checkbox to check whether it's complete or not. So let's set up all of our code for doing this. First, we're going to have a label, and inside of this label, we're going to put the to-do.name, just like this. Make sure I get rid of that. And then inside of here, we also need our input, which is going to be a type of checkbox, just like that. And we also want to set in here a checked property, essentially the value, and we want to set that to todo.complete. And now, as you can see, we have our to-do with our checkbox over here. And if we come over and change our complete value to true, you can see it's going to check our checkbox for us. And if we have it as false, obviously it's not going to be checked. Now, what we need to do is actually set up events so that we can actually add to-dos. So let's remove this default to-do for now and just have an empty array, because by default, we're not going to have any to-dos at all in our application when it starts up. But we do want to add to-dos whenever we add this to-do with the add to-do button. So we need to set up an Onclicklistener on our add to-do button. So we can just say onClick, and we want to set this equal to a function. In our case, we're going to call a function which is just called handle add to-do, and let's create that function up here. We can just say function handle add to-do, and it's going to take that event property. And inside of this function, what we need to do is we need to set our to-dos to one more to-do. So we need to take our previous to-dos, add our new to-do, and then set our to-dos to that to-do list. But you'll notice one problem immediately. We don't have access to the name inside of this field. We can type this in, click add to-do, it's going to call this function, but we need access to this name. And this is where what's called the useRef hook comes in handy. So we can say useRef, and the useRef hook allows us to reference elements inside of our HTML, in our case, the input. So we can say ref here is going to be equal to a variable. We're just going to call this to-do name ref, and then we can create this variable up here by just saying const to-do name ref is equal to useRef. Now we're going to have access to this input element inside this to-do name ref variable, and to access it, we just say to-do name ref dot current, which is going to be whatever element we are currently referencing, in our case, this input. So we can say .current.value, and this is going to be the value of our input. So we can just say that the name is going to be equal to this. And then we, of course, want to return if our name is equal to an empty string. Essentially, if they don't type in a name, we just want to return so we don't add an empty to-do. And then afterwards, for now, let's just log out that name to make sure that this is working. Just like that. So now let's inspect this page, go over to our console. And if we type in a name, for example, we could just say hi, click add to do, you can see it prints out hi. If we type in just h, hit add to do, it's going to print out h. So we have access to whatever is inside of this variable here inside of our input. One other thing that we probably want to do is we want to take our to-do name.ref.current, and we want to set the value here equal to null. That way, if we type in something and hit add to do, it's going to clear out our input for us. It's just a nice quality of life change. Now the real change that we need to make is actually setting our to-dos. And the way set to-dos works is you have two different ways you can set them. You can just pass it a value, for example, empty array would clear all of our to-dos, or you can use the previous value, in our case, our previous to-dos. It's a function call, so it's a function that is going to give us the previous to-dos, which allows us to change that. So we could say that now our new to-dos is going to be equal to previous to-dos, and we want to spread this over our array, and then we want to add a new to-do to that list. So let's just, for our case, give it an ID of 1, a name which is going to be equal to our name variable, and a complete of false. Now what we can do is when we save this, we type something in, hit add to do, you see it's going to add that to do, but the problem is we are always adding with an ID of 1, and if we inspect our page, we should see that we have an error inside of our console, which is saying that we have two keys with the exact same ID. So what we need to do is actually download a library that's going to allow us to completely create random IDs. And the best library for this is called UUID. So we can just say npm I UUID, just like that. It's going to download the library for us. And we can actually import the UUID inside of our application. So we can say UUID v4 from, and we want to import that from UUID/v4, just like that. This is going to give us access to UUID v4, which is just a function that generates a random ID. So now if we save that, create some to-dos, we're no longer going to get that error of having duplicate keys because our IDs are now completely unique. But you will notice a problem. Every time we refresh our page, we no longer have our to-dos being shown up. They're not being persisted across page reload, and this is something that's very easy to fix with React. We want to store these inside of local storage. And the easiest way to do things which are a side effect, so for example, every time we add a to-do, we want to save it, we can use what's called useEffect, which is just another hook inside of React. And this is just a function which is going to take as its first parameter another function, and this is the function that we want to do things. So every single time something changes, we want to call this very first function, and the way we determine when to call that function is we pass an array of properties here. And this array is going to be all of our dependencies. So anytime anything in this array changes, we want to run this useEffect function. So in our case, anytime our array of to-dos changes, we want to save our to-dos. And saving them is really easy. We're just going to save them to local storage. So we can say local storage.setItem. We need to give this item a key here. So let's create a variable for that. We're going to call it local storage key. And we're just going to set that to to-dos, to-do app.todos, just like that. You can call this key whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. So we pass it first the key, and then we want to make sure we pass it a string. So we're going to stringify our to-dos. So this is just a JSON string of our to-do application. There we go. So now when we add a to-do, add another to-do, it's actually saving these to our local storage. But of course, when we refresh, they're not showing up. And that's because we need to use another effect. And this effect we're going to call to load our to-dos. And we only want to call this once, right when our component loads. So if we pass an empty array of dependencies, it'll call this function once. And since the empty array never changes, it'll never recall this useEffect. And this useEffect, we want to set our to-dos to what we get back from our stored to-dos. So we can say const stored to-dos is going to be equal to local storage.getItem of that local storage key. And we want to make sure that we get that item stored into our stored to-dos, and then we want to set our to-dos to that stored to-dos only if we actually have stored to-dos. So if we have stored to-dos, then set our to-dos to those stored to-dos. Now if I save that, you'll see we're getting an error, and that's because this is a string. We need to parse this using JSON. So we can just say json.parse of that string. This will convert it to an array. And now if we save that, you can see that this is working properly. Now let's add some to-dos. We'll say FFF, AAA, and if we refresh, those to-dos are still showing up inside of our application. So we know that both storing and getting our to-dos is working properly. So now we have saving built into our application in only just a few lines of code, which is the real power of the useEffect inside of React. Now this is all great, but right now we have no way to toggle our to-dos. Even if we click on this checkbox, it's not actually going to check our to-do for us. We need to write some React code in order to store the change of our to-do from being not complete to complete or vice versa. So let's write a function to do that. We can just come down here, create a function called toggle to-do, and this is going to take just an ID of the to-do that we want to toggle. And then what we want to do is we want to toggle the to-do from our list. So the first thing we want to do is get a new list of to-dos. We're just going to call this new to-dos, and it's just going to be equal to a copy of our current to-dos list. This is just so we don't change our current to-do list, and we always want to make sure we create a copy. In React, you should never directly modify a state variable. You should always create a copy before modifying it, and then use that copy to set the new state. So we've created our copy. Now we want to get the to-do that we're actually trying to modify. So we can get that from our new to-dos by just finding a to-do that has the to-do.id, which is equal to the ID that we passed into toggle to-do. Then we can just say to-do.complete is going to be equal to the opposite of to-do.complete. So we can just negate that here. And then we can set our to-dos to our new to-dos. This is essentially going to allow us to toggle our to-do from complete to incomplete or from incomplete to complete. But we don't have any way we can use that function because, as you remember, our to-dos are stored inside this to-do component, which is referenced inside of our to-do list, which is referenced inside of our app. So we need to pass this function down into our to-do list. So we can just say to-do toggle to-do is going to be equal to toggle to-do. Then inside of our list, we can import that toggle to-do prop and pass it down to individual to-dos, just like this. So now we're passing both the to-do and the toggle to-do function. And then finally, inside of our to-do, we have that toggle to-do function. And on our input, we can come in here and we want to say on change, we want to call a function. And this function is not going to be our toggle to-do because we need to make sure we pass an ID. So we're just going to say we're going to call this handle to-do click. And then we're going to create that function, which is handle to-do click. And inside of this function, all we need to do is we need to call toggle to do, and we want to pass it our todo.id. Now if we save that and we just click the check, you can see it's actually checking our box for us. Same thing with our A. And if we refresh, you see it storing that complete status inside of our to-dos inside of local storage. And the way that this is working, it's a little bit confusing, is what's happening is every time we click, it's calling this onChange, which is calling our toggle to do function with the ID of the to-do we're inside of. That in turn gets passed up through to-do list into our app, which calls this toggle to do function here, which resets our to-do list variable to the new list of to-dos with the to-do checked that we clicked on. Now that we actually know how to toggle and untoggle our to-dos, let's make this text down here actually tell us how many to-dos are unchecked. And this is fairly straightforward to do. We can just say to-dos.filter, and we want to filter all of the ones that are not checked. So we can say to-do, which is not complete, just like this. And we just want to get the length of the not complete to-dos. Now if we say that, you can see we have one to-do left. We check this, it goes down to 0. We uncheck both of them, it says 2 left to do, and so on. And if we add a new to-do, it's going to go up to 3, which is great. Now let's set up the click event listener for our clear complete. We can just come in, on click, we want to handle clear to-dos, and we can create that function. Let's just do it right here. And what this is going to do is it's going to set our to-dos to the new list that doesn't have any of our complete ones. So again, let's create a variable called new to-dos, and that's going to be equal to our current to-dos dot filter, and we want to filter on all the to-dos that are not complete. So we can say to-do dot complete. This is going to be all of our non-complete to-dos, and we just want to set our to-dos to that new to-dos just like this. And now if we click clear completed, you can see it's cleared everything that we have checked just like that. And when we refresh, it's going to save those changes. And that's everything for the basics of React. But as I mentioned, there's so much more to React, and my full course is going to explore everything in React in much more depth than I can in this video. So if that interests you, make sure to check out the course linked in the description down below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and have a good day.